Good day, listeners. This is Chris Miller, and you're listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. It is another hot day in Dallas. It's been hot all summer, hot all over the world. And so I think it's a good thing that we have today's guest. And I want to explain there's a couple levels to Claire that I want to share first before I introduce her. One is that I love what Claire does for a living and what she focuses on, because she's in alignment with me. And I really do believe that first we align our spiritual sense, our consciousness, and then we create. And so in my book, I tell people to look for moments of awe. I talk about meditation. I talk about what I call a morning practice. So I didn't even know this morning practice existed. And so I was so excited because Claire came out and I'm like, wow, this is wonderful. So I would like to introduce Claire Takahashi. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yes. Yep.
She is a creative earth coach, a meditative guide, and an artist of paint, petals, and words. That's right, folks. You heard it. Not just paint, but petals and words. And she is certified as a wayfinder coach. And this is the part I'm so excited about, a morning altar teacher. So good morning, Claire. How are you today?
I am well. It's less hot here in the Pacific Northwest. So
oh, you are so lucky. This is really rough. I'm sort of like, oh, I need to move. It's rough. Yesterday, I think it was 109.
Oh.
And I think what I find, I love what you do. So, and listeners, I'm going to slide some images over the screen so you can see, but tell us about this. What is a morning altar exactly?
Ooh. So the morning altar practice is a 7-step mindfulness tool that weaves together nature, art, and ritual. And Day, my mentor, who's the originator of this, he's got an amazing book called Morning Altars. I've been training and studying with him for almost, I guess, about 3 years now. And I teach in his teacher training program. And it's this amazing way of reconnecting with your heart, reconnecting with the earth that's underneath your feet, and remembering what we've forgotten as humans. And so for me, that's where a lot of the spirit piece of this comes in, because you are tapping into not just your own spirit, but that of the landscape that you inhabit. And so we've got this kind of insane, in a lot of ways, illusion in the world these days, and in most places, that we're disconnected from everything. And that's just not true. Because if I was disconnected from the earth, then I wouldn't have access to the air. So just the fact that I'm breathing in here by the grace and, gift of the trees, I'm connected to them, and I am giving back carbon dioxide for them to store in the soil and to process. And so we're in this symbiotic relationship. And so to me, using morning altars as a tool in which you tap into your creativity, tap into the wordless heart of what you're feeling in that exact moment, and have that conversation between you and the world around you, and maybe discover something that you hadn't processed, or that you hadn't even imagined or dreamed about. That's what I think using petals, using the gifts of the earth to build something, and whether that's symmetrical, whether that's artistic, or whether that's just a single flower that you place upon the earth that you're giving back, there's a really beautiful, mindful connection that can happen there, and it can be really magical. So, yeah.
Well, okay. So you said a couple of things I love.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Today, more than ever, and I don't know if it's because of science or modern life, we are so isolated from nature. Unfortunately, we live indoors, but then we go into a car, and the car is air conditioned. We get into the office and we forget. And I think that is a great mistake by humankind right now, is we forget that we are all part of this system, right?
Yeah. I love what I don't know if you've read David Abrams' book, Becoming Animal, but
No,
he's got a lovely section in that book where he talks about how up until pretty recently, the way that humans used to travel, we would travel across the landscape and it would allow our bodies to adjust and to attune themselves to the place that we were in. And now we, like you just said, hop in a car, or we hop on a plane, and we literally
right.
take our bodies out and then drop them in something new. And it's no wonder that we get jet lag and, our bodies freak out or we get sick or whatever it is, because we didn't give our body time to adjust. And we expect to be able to like turn on and turn off. And there's so much stress in that when you're like, oh, I have to be this way here in this place, and then get to this completely different place with a completely different set of trees. It's a completely different biome that you're stepping into.
Oh, temperature,
That,
everything, right?
yeah,
Light,
yeah,
just everything.
everything. And so that's actually one of my favorite ways to use the morning altar practice for myself, is anytime I go someplace new, however I'm getting there, that is a way for me to say hello to the place that I'm in and to greet that place with respect and gratitude for holding me there, and to looking around and going, oh, well, who are the trees that live here?
Hmm.
Who are the plants that live here? What is, this biome, this landscape that I've stepped into, and who lives here? Who am I interacting with while I'm here? And it gives me a chance, like I said, to say hello to the place,
Yeah, it's
as
like
well as, and it slows my body down,
it
my
does.
nervous
It's
system.
you're right. It's a meditative practice. It's
Hmm.
calming yourself and connecting before. I mean, which is what I talk about the creative process. That's what so many people really should focus on. You don't just go into your studio and start painting. You should have a ritual. And I love that you mentioned that,
Yeah.
right? You should have
Hmm.
a ritual of connection, of calming.
Yeah.
And so explain, like, how do you do that? I mean, I show pictures, but you're talking about collecting things in nature and assembling them. Is that important? Is it important that it is in a circle, or is it?
Um, I feel like that aspect of the practice can be very unique to the person. So for some people, the sacred geometry of what they're creating is really important. Um, you can, if you go to morning altars on Instagram or follow the hashtag, you can see tons of people that are starting to practice this around the world, and see altars of all shapes and sizes, all kinds of colors, some that, like I said, are just one thing. um, I had a student that I mentored last year who, her passion is found altars, and so whatever she finds on her morning wonder walk becomes an altar. And sometimes that is a piece of plastic that she picks up and takes to then be able to, recycle that, process that appropriately. And she creates an altar out of it before, bringing it back to, help the landscape out. Or sometimes it's a rusty, collection of screws or something
I
like
love it.
that she's found. Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
funny. It's so funny you say that, because ever since I was a kid, I do that. Like, I
Yeah.
collect things I
Yeah.
find, an old penny, a
Yep.
rusty nail.
Yep.
When I even driving down the highway here in Dallas, I'll see the wreck car accident leaves
Hmm.
refuge. There'll be
Yeah.
a shiny chrome bumper, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that's a piece of art, right?
Yeah. 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 And so your altars, your earth art, it doesn't have to be just flowers. I think a lot of people are drawn to flowers, and obviously there's a mindful symmetrical magic that is inherent to flowers. But I also love following leaves and grass or seeds, um, and having just the holistic aspect of what can actually become a part of this is really exciting, I think, in terms of this as a mindful practice and as a tool, because since it can be so unique to each person, I think that's part of what can make this so meditative for people, because there are no rules, and that's okay. I mean, we have a set of guidelines that we're going through. You have 7 steps that you can fall back on, that you can turn to for inspiration, or if you're feeling stuck, so that you have a place to step into this. But also, like I said, there's no rules, because this is a conversation between you and the earth. And so when you're listening, what is she saying? And then go from there.
I think, it's funny, even as you talk, I'm like going, uh, right. It's calming me down. Cause I had a little crazy morning. It's one of those mornings where a lot of things are due, and I'm running around, and as you talk about collecting things and assembling them. And what I love the most is, cause I'm a big proponent of this, seeing the beauty in everything,
Mhm.
right? You know, whether it's a piece of plastic that someone threw out their car window, or a pine cone, or a
Yeah.
nail, it's you to see the beauty in it. And that extends out, I think, to clear it into your whole day when you
Yeah.
start your day, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And when you start in wonder, and I was actually just rereading that bit in your book this morning, because I loved that part where you're talking about the bird feeder and drinking your coffee and having that sense of awe and that sense of wonder. And that's the first step of the practice. And I think for me, that's a huge window for me into anything creative that I want to do throughout my day, is having that sense of curiosity and that sense of wonder and awe as a starting point, because it isn't about me knowing the answer. It's about me following the petals, or following the paint, or following the leaves one by one, and sitting on that edge of not knowing. I think that can be a part that can be really uncomfortable for a lot of people, because we're taught that we're supposed to know everything, by virtue of just this modern world, and the fact that we've got Google and we can look anything and everything up, which is amazing, but also does kind of teach us that, oh, we're supposed to know things. We're supposed to know what the art is going to look like. We're supposed to know what the final destination is going to be.
Oh,
And so that for me has been one of the greatest teachers with both morning altars and my own artistic practices, and mindfulness practices, is kind of giving myself more ways to become unaddicted to that destination, and to be more addicted to the journey than I am to where I'm going. And
yeah.
it's way more fun that way, but it's really hard when you've got, that's patterned into us from a
Well,
very young age.
it is. We're told, like, I love how you said that. That's beautiful. We let it unfurl. That's like when that's why I love abstract painting is I mean, doing literal realistic painting is fine, but you're always driven to a certain point, which is to make it look like something that's there. But when you do abstract, you're literally letting that brush stroke, the paint, and what you said, even more importantly, I love it. It's like being the watcher, or being present,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
without judgment, like without judgment, not
Mm-hmm.
critiquing it, not trying to answer, not telling it where it needs to go or what it needs to be. I guess it's sort of a Buddhist kind of energy, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's quite lovely. And the longer I would share this with my creative listeners, which is everybody, the longer you stay in that place, the longer you don't make a decision, the longer you don't force it to an end, the more creativity. It's like you're stirring a pot of creativity. And
Mm-hmm.
if you just stir it and stir it, it has such potential. It's called, the gap. I say, if you let that gap get as long as it can be, the practice making it longer. And that's exactly what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. It's making me think of, the key to a really good soup is a long time,
a
and
long
letting
simmer,
it
right?
simmer.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's got to
It,
simmer, but we
it's
get so impatient.
It's true. It's funny when I make spaghetti sauce, I cook it for a whole day. I cook that sauce for a whole day. Then I put it in the
Oh,
fridge, and then I reheat it the next day, because those flavors meld together and they create a new flavor.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you do art yourself, right? I mean, we talked
Hmm.
about this. You're an artist, and did you go to
Hmm.
art school or
I did not. I did not. I studied theology.
oh, delightful. That's great.
So, and history, and I did do some photography classes and things like that. But yeah, not primarily art school. So I wish I could go back and have another shot at that, because I would like to have multiple degrees. I wish I could have done them all at the same time, do art school. I also would have liked to have done like an anthropology degree and an ethnobotany degree and like all the fun things.
But you
So,
know what, Claire, you're young. It's not over yet. And and I do think I always believe we are lifelong. I love that saying, a lifetime
mhm.
learner, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So is there a certain discipline that you like? Do you like drawing or pencil work or watercolors? What would you or
Yeah,
photography? Yeah.
I would say that my primary mode is usually watercolors. I really enjoy liquid watercolors as well, and things like walnut ink and stuff like that. So I like things that move. Um, think that for me to that is part of my unlearning. Growing up, there was a lot of rigidity for life, and I was a parentified child, and there was a lot of not being myself fully, and not there was no space. And so caring for other people, caring for other people's lives and emotions and decisions. And um, so for me, I think as I've gone through my own healing process, and working through what I learned from that, and the patterns that I no longer need, watercolors for me are kind of an antidote in that way, because there's only so much control
Mm,
that you actually have with them, because depending on you know the humidity in the room or outdoors, that changes how the water and the pigments interact. And the angle that you might have something on, or the type of paper that you're using, things can dry slower or faster. And you can practice that and learn a lot of things about, trying to have similar, conditions for things. But there's also just a sense of you don't know what's going to happen. And so, again, for me, it's that, can I be on a journey with this and allow the paint to do what she wants to do, to allow this pigment to explore the way that she's going to today? And how can I play with this instead of fighting it, if that
uh-huh.
makes sense?
It makes total sense. I love how I was going to ask you, well, why do you like things that flow? And you answered it. It's that
Mhm,
there is an element of letting the material lead you, and how it and
mhm.
watercolor is especially, I think, of all the disciplines, watercolor is one of the most wild uh, disciplines, because it does what it wants, and you have to be really delicate with it or not. I mean, and you're right, no matter how much you think you have a control, suddenly some shape comes up or a blur,
Mhm.
and you have to work with it,
Yeah.
or you know, I love what you were talking about too, because something I'd love to share with the listeners that I just realized, and I want to share with all artists, um, that we don't pay a lot of us don't pay attention to, and I just noticed it while I'm doing some painting, how important the canvas is, whether it's board or Bristol board or wood or uncoated wood. You get right. It reacts
Yeah.
so differently.
Yeah. Yeah. It totally does. I mean, depending on what kind of paper I'm using, or aqua board or something like that, completely changes how things are interacting. And even, I think for people that aren't familiar with watercolor, a lot of the um, the focus is on using that 100% cotton paper. Um, and those are amazing. And also, they're all so different. I mean, you can go down a rabbit hole in terms of like how the papers are made, if they're handmade, if they're like molded, the percentages of things, like where the fibers come from and how they're pressed together, like all this stuff, and how much texture, the hot versus the cold, and
Oh, I love this.
all of those things.
It's
So
true. It's
it's a complete rabbit hole. I don't want to get into too minutia for people that are like, oh, I don't care about paper,
Well,
but
but I think no, I'm glad you're saying it, because I do think it's something that you need to it's about being present, right? And noticing
Mhm,
what's there. You're not judging it. But I'm working on a show, and I had a canvas made for one last painting, and it's a different source. Oh my God, I love it. I love the canvas. I texted my supplier and I said, "Oh my God, this canvas," because it has a tooth in it. Like a really
ooh,
interesting tooth. And so when I drag the paint over it, it's gathering up and bunching up and being really lush. And yet it also because it has a tooth, like you said, when I tend to wet down my acrylics a little bit,
mhm,
and they blend out into it. It grabs it. So I just think it's about being present, right, to your
yeah,
materials.
yeah.
And so I love that you are an artist, and that you use this practice as an artist. So when you do the morning altar, do you how many people do you take? Do you go out in nature with them? Tell me a little bit about that. Do you?
So that's another beautiful thing about this tool is its inherent flexibility and adaptability. So I have done that where I'm going out with a group of people, and we go on a wander and we build. I also do it virtually in terms of workshops and also one-on-one work with clients. Um, I've done it one-on-one with people. And then I also, like I said, the ritual aspects, the ceremony aspect of this work, I also do that for people with retreats and things. So coming in and facilitating. I just did one a couple weekends ago, where I facilitated a closing ritual and ceremony for people to physically actually cross over a threshold as they were leaving the retreat. And we had, the morning altar tool and practice as a part of that, so that I built out an installation, and then people were able to step over it and then add their own pieces and have a conversation with the land that had been holding them for the retreat, and as a way to offer gratitude and just to reflect on what their experience was and what they were both leaving behind and what they were taking with them. So this really can be used in so many ways, which again, I think is what makes it exciting for me because I love it. I am such an Aquarius. Like, I'm like, no rules, no boxes. Like,
I love it too. What my goal is when I started my whole vision here is to do uh week long retreats. So someday maybe I'll be flying you into Santa Fe,
yay.
and you can help me with a part of the ritual, because I think that, like I said, creativity is not just what happens in the studio, it's what happens before the studio. It's the preparation you do. And I love the idea of the ritual. Going back to because I always want to put definition around it. You said it doesn't have to be a circle. So
Mhm.
because it kind of looks like a mandala or something. You're like
Yeah, they can. Hmm.
it can, but it
Yeah,
doesn't have to be. And so
yeah.
the proper word is all you just use altar, whatever whether it's rectangular or
Yeah. I mean, I think that again can be a little bit unique to the person. I think the word alter for some people can have negative connotations.
mhm.
I think some people prefer using the term earth art.
Oh, okay.
Some people, depending on their training, do use the term mandala. I don't tend to use that just because um, I think that word has kind of been generalized a little bit because that actually does refer to a specific mindful practice, with its roots in India and across the world. So I don't tend to use that term per se for most of my work. Um, but yeah, I think I typically use either earth art or altar for myself, depending on kind of the intention behind what I'm doing, and kind of it's what is coming through with the conversation that I'm having with the earth.
Yeah, I think that
And
makes sense.
yeah, but to me, it is a very sacred practice because there's a lot of deep listening that is occurring. I think, you know, people enter into creative flow in a lot of different ways. But my experience has been that anytime I'm in that, that is a very sacred spiritual way of being. It's a way of being. It's not me doing something, it's a channeled experience of things that are coming through. And so we talk about that a lot um, in the different places where we teach the morning altar practice. We talk about that as, we're kind of allowing something that is greater than ourselves to use our hands and fingers and to have that conversation with that which is more than human, because we are working directly with living things and everything is alive. So how are we having that conversation? And so again, that's why to me it is a very sacred thing to be able to interact with the earth in this artistic way.
Claire, you're saying so many things. I want to stop. Like, I want to have a pause button and ask a question and then go back and ask a question, so let's unpack that.
Yeah.
How do you listen? How could you explain to someone listening? Because that's a big one for me, but that's a tough one to explain. So if you're taking me out, say we're walking and we're doing, I don't know if you do a walk with it or if you sit in some area, how would you tell me to listen to what's around me?
Yeah. So
I like to ask good questions.
yeah, no, I love this question, and I'm listening for what wants to come through.
Oh, I love it. I love what you're saying because I do the same thing. I sit there,
yeah.
Wait.
Yeah. So there's a lot of threads with this. This is one of my favorite aspects of, I think, just creative practice, the morning altar practice, any of really, even Martha's Wayfinder tools, this listening aspect of these things. But I feel like the thread that I'd love to share today is, if I'm taking you out and we're doing the beginning of the morning altar practice, we begin with a wander and we begin with curiosity. We begin with wondering. And so we're moving through a landscape or a room or whatever the space may be that we're in. And as you're wandering, you're noticing, you're observing, you're seeing what's small, you're seeing what's big. You're starting to tap into your senses, feel the ground beneath your feet, feel the air on your skin. And as you move through that and experience that and start to ask questions, then we would move to the second piece. And that second step is place. And one of my favorite things to invite people to do is to pause in the place, whatever facet of the landscape that is calling to you. You can sit, you can stand, whatever that might be. But as you pause there, then you let the place wander around you and see how she's moving and how she is smelling, tasting, speaking. And that, I find a lot of the times, allows people to do a new kind of listening that they used to know how to do when they were very small, and they've just forgotten. That kind of like your senses are all open and you're porous, like the place is moving in and out of you. And that is a completely different listening experience, where you're just receiving in a way, and things are moving through you. The air is moving through you. The moisture is moving through you. We're ocean beings. We're full of water and salt and air and a little bit of earth. And so all of that is moving through us when we're in that state of listening, and I think being more fully human in a lot of ways. And like you said, it's hard to encapsulate that in just saying, okay, now we're going to listen. So, being able to guide people through that experience allows them to unlock things and remember things that I could never explain to them fully. And they will find their own unique magic in that, because everybody has their own, unique relationship with the way that they are listening and experiencing and receiving the world. And so it's not me prescribing or telling them what to do. It's just me inviting them back into experience and back into relationship with that way of listening that they've forgotten. So, because we lived that way for thousands of years. It's only the last couple of 100 years, really, that we've kind of moved into this 2D, this flat way of living versus a multidimensional, intuitive way of living, where all of our senses are engaged with what's happening.
Oh, that's delicious. What you just said is really delicious. In so many ways. And I love that you move through the space and then sit and let the space talk to you. What does it want to say to you? And it's delightful.
Yeah.
Really.
And then you can do that on paper with
Yeah.
your paint.
Oh, exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
So I tell people as an exercise, I just throw stuff on the paint free and then sit back and listen to what the painting is telling you. And there's
Yeah.
always an area that is just beautifully working. Even with watercolor, you spread that watercolor, there'll be an area that you go, oh my gosh, look how that yellow blends into the red, and there's a little purple on the edge. And then what I tell people is to make it bigger, but to learn to make it bigger. But I really do love that. I love that. I was thinking about what you said, how we have that. We always have that as children when we're young. We have that presence. And I would encourage listeners to do this while I'm doing it. I was thinking about when I was a kid, I have a specific memory of snowfall. And it was I grew up in Pennsylvania. And so we get this, it would start snowing at 5 o'clock. And by 11, there would be like 12 inches of snow, that fast, just from nothing to 12. And I remember going down into the back lot, and there was a treed lot behind me, and laying on the ground. And I was by myself. Back then we weren't helicopter parents. I was probably 7 or 8, out by myself. It was evening. It was night. You could see the stars, and laying there and just watching the snow fall around me. That is life, right? That's the beauty of life.
Yeah.
It gives me goosebumps just talking about it. And I encourage listeners to do that today. When you get off this podcast, go and just be present to how gorgeous, right?
Yeah.
And then listen to what she's telling you. That I love that. It's not just about you pushing something on it, just being there, right?
Yeah. And we live in a world that is so alive, and I think just the story that you just shared is a perfect example of a moment where you were alive, like you're most alive, which is just so cool. And I love it. So thank you for sharing.
It does it. And why those are so important for many reasons. But another important thing is when times are rough. I actually had lunch with Dr. Jane. She was on my podcast earlier. I had lunch with her this week, and she talked about some neuroscience. And she says that our brains always gravitate towards negative memories. It's a survival mechanism. So it is our job, and I would encourage you to listen to Dr. Jane's podcast later, but it's our job to kind of cultivate and nurture those good memories and just savor them. Go back and replay it and replay it and replay it.
Yeah. I love that. I think one thing that I love about Martha Beck's work too is she's so tapped into the science, the brain chemistry of all this stuff too. So I love hearing that, because something that she talks about a lot that I've found to be true with morning altars is this idea of mirror neurons, and how they're studying how our brains will mirror what we're perceiving. And so when we're working with the earth, when you're working with flowers and with leaves, and when you're putting your the same way that you stand barefoot on earth and you start to receive those ions, when you're working with earth art, and that is a creative practice, you start to mirror the earth, and it really calms down your nervous system a lot. And it allows you to process things that maybe are pretty scary in other realms in a safe way, because you're completely held by something that is stable beneath you and is stable in front of you. She might not be saying everything that you love, in terms of, you might be trying to play with petals and the petals are like, no, I'm not going to lay flat, I'm going to curl. And then you're like, why are you doing this to me?
Which you could explore, right? Like, why do you feel that
Yes,
way? Yeah.
exactly. And that's the edge, where you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm having trouble with having this conversation with something that is not reflecting the way that I expected. And so how do I sit with that and work through that and feel that and experience it? And you can do that there with the earth, because there's no judgment. There's no judgment, there's no shame. And you don't have to feel guilty for being anything other than what you are in that
Right.
moment.
Right. It's a moment
Yeah.
to notice. Just notice who you're
Yeah.
being. Why am I being
Yeah.
this way? Why do I think
Yeah.
it's me?
Yeah.
It's just the petal, right?
Yeah.
But so mirror neurons,
Hmm.
which I think would explain too, if you get in the practice of constantly looking for good, the beauty,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're going to mirror it.
Yeah.
And your body will mirror it.
Yep.
Be beautiful and bountiful and abundant and healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, what we keep focusing on grows. What we focus on
Yeah.
grows.
Hmm.
And that's the scientific background to it, which is
Yeah.
really great.
I know, it's fascinating. It's really interesting.
Well, I find it interesting that I talk to all these different people in different what I'd call modalities, right?
Hmm.
And I see the overlap. I mean, I was having lunch with Dr. Jane and catching up with her, and then she told me that, and I'm like, how interesting that they find that the brain is doing the same things that can be explained through spiritual teachings or through ancient practices that were here long before science, right?
Yeah.
There's oh, who was it that I listened to? I read a lot of different books, but they talk about how you have to look at, and this is going to be interesting for some listeners, but when you look at ancient religious practices, there's a lot of issues there, but there are actual practices that were formed by what it means to be human. And so
Yeah.
I know there's people out there that have been hurt by religion, but don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, because there are good things. When you just talked about ritual, altars,
Hmm.
there's goodness in those.
Yeah.
There's reasons, and the goodness ties into actually how your brain works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man's been on this planet for a while, and so they've developed these practices that they called religion, but are actually about how your brain works. And like changing your mood. When I was raised Catholic, and you walk in to the church, there's holy water and you bless yourself. And it's a ritual of water, right? Nature,
Yeah.
water, touching your skin. And when you think about it, it's connected, right? It's similar,
Yeah.
using nature to ground
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you just said about that, where things like that have come from are from, you know, first peoples, indigenous
Mm.
places. Like, that's where those have all come from. And they've just been adapted by religions over the years, because they recognize the importance of those, of having ritual and meaning making available to people, and how that can provide structure in what can feel like a crazy experience, I think, for a lot of us, in these
Right.
inhabiting these bodies here on this planet. And so yeah, I love what you just said about the ritual aspect of this. And I think morning altars really is a remembering. And Day talks a lot about that in his book, and is very specific about, just his gratitude for the lineage of people that have done this kind of work for thousands of years, because we were creating conversation and art with the earth long before we were writing things down on a page. And, we were having ceremony, we were creating sacred spaces long before organized religion came into the picture. And so the morning altar practice can be, in a lot of ways, a way to invite the sacred back into our daily life in a way that is simpler, I think, and doesn't put a whole bunch of baggage, because it's not a to-do list, and it's not like I said, you're working with the earth, and there's no shame or judgment or rules there. It's just tending to a relationship, which is one that we've always had already. And so just the reminder of that, I think, can be a really beautiful thing for people to have an experience with the sacred that doesn't feel tied down, by some of the historical baggage that we've ended up with a lot of, kind of all of these words that we're using even today. There can be a lot of baggage with those words. And so, I do love this as a tool for releasing some of that, for letting go of it.
Yeah, I want to say what I think about that which is there seems to be this, it's science or religion or nature, and it's not an or, it's an and. I love that. It's an and. There's truth in all of these practices. And if we learn to be present and sit back and watch it, we can hear that truth and acknowledge it. It's not a split world. We are a whole planet. Everything is connected. Everything is connected, right? There's not outside of that. And if you're feeling that if you notice that yourself, or I would say if I notice that, when I notice that myself, if I have that over there feeling, I have to investigate why do I feel that leaf is purposely curling and won't do my altar? Why? We're all connected. And so, we're always challenged with that, right? Why do I resent that petal? But, or that comment, or that blog, or that person, or that belief, and just being present to what is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the shadow work, and not being afraid of those. And again, for me, a lot of that goes back to art, and not being afraid of the dark and the light places in a piece, not being afraid of intensity of color or darkness. And that's been a lot of inner work for me, but I find that metaphor can be really helpful for people, because they can be like, oh, I don't really, I don't want to deal with the difficult things or the hard things, or it'll be too much, or nobody wants to hear about that. Well, but those are the illumination points, because the best part of any piece to me is, where does that light and dark interact most? Where is the sharpest contrast? Because that's where your eye is going to go. And that's where you're going to start to see the story, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes so much sense. Claire, let me tell you, I have interviewed a lot of people. I've been doing this for 2 years, and you are the first person that's really understand the most the alignment between creativity and spirituality, and the way you're talking. And I love it. I really do. I love it, because I exactly agree with you. I did a whole series of work about the edge. It's all about the edge. Where light hits the dark, where color hits black. This painting behind me, it's about the edge.
Yeah.
And so you just said it so beautifully. And wow.
Yeah. It's sitting on that uncomfortable edge, or sitting in that dark place. And that's something that I think is just a big passion for me, is sitting with people in that hard space and letting them know that it's not too much. It's not too much, and that it is important to sit in that place for as long as they need to. Because if you just bottle it all up, it's going to get stuck in your body somewhere, both your body and your brain and your heart and your spirit. Like, it's going to end up stuck somewhere, just like he talks about in The Body Keeps the Score. Things get stuck within it, and we all have trauma in some form. We all have heartbreak in some form. That's a part of being human. We have such an aversion to that because we do think that there's something wrong with the shadows, but those are our greatest teachers. And not that that's always enjoyable. It's not always enjoyable, but it is the greatest teaching that you receive, I think, throughout this life. And so learning how to work with that and how to play with it, how to be curious about it instead of existing in this state of tension of not wanting to work with that. If you can face that fear and step through it, walk with it, then that's when a lot of breakthroughs can start to happen, I think, for people, because they're giving themselves permission to actually be their full selves with all of the light and dark pieces, as opposed to, well, I can only be this one thing because that's what's acceptable. And instead, it's like, no, like, let's look at the whole thing of you, because that's what makes you you. I mean, if you're all this like bright white, well, then I can't actually see you because there aren't any edges, to your point. So we're, using like the shadows help you to find your edges of who you are. And, whether that's on paper or whether that's why a lot of my particular morning altars work, I really like to have a lot of space in my pieces because I like there to be room for things to move through. And so that's kind of part of my signature with that, I guess you can say, is there's a lot of space between for different edges, for different contrasts, for shapes to kind of reveal themselves, if that makes sense. I don't like to fill it all in.
Right.
I like to let
that's
the
your creative
space
DNA. You prefer the space. Some people might want it
Yeah.
all packed. In fact, I was going to ask you earlier, there's some, oh gosh, some people do those stacked. What is that called when you take rocks and stack them up?
I mean, I think if you're, depending on what lineage you come from, a lot of people use the word cairn, which would be like a Celtic lineage in terms of that's a remembrance tool. And so I think a lot of people would use that term probably loosely. Yeah.
So a couple of things that came to me when you were just talking. First, I don't know if you've started one yet, but I hear a book. I really do think you have what it takes to write a book. There's a book in your future. I can tell you.
Oh, okay? Thank you.
I can tell. And second, I want to share with our listeners that you did do a worksheet, right? We're going to have a worksheet on the site that they can go to on Spiritual Artists Today. You can go in there and download Clara's worksheet, and you outline the process briefly. I don't know if it's certainly not going to be as good as you live, but it gives people a practice run with it, right?
Yeah.
With how to make a sacred morning altar. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners? I mean, this has been great. Oh, you are available to go out for conferences and stuff and do this practice, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because I just talking to you, you bring such lushness to the concept. It's not just, okay, we're going to make something pretty with a bunch of pine cones. You have you really, I think having you there would be really valuable. Yeah. It's as a guide. Really unique. A really unique embodied experience, I think, for a lot of people. And like I said, it's not something, when I'm stepping into spaces to share this, I really like to let people know that I'm not teaching them anything they don't already know. I love that word guide in a lot of ways versus teacher, because I'm just
a guide. I'm just a welcomer, a person with an invitation to remember. I'm just someone who, you know, has had the privilege to learn from a lot of animals and plants and to have had them be a huge part of my own healing. And so that has given me a lot of conversations that I've had with them over the years to draw upon. And so I like to think that, they walk with me and they partner with me. And so they allow me to hold that or channel that vibration that is more in the heart versus the mind. And like I said, we get pulled out of that by this modern world, which I think is way more wild than what we term wild.
Exactly. It's funny.
Yeah. And so I, it's just an honor to me to get to invite people to remember these things and to step back into relationship and to know that they are not alone, because we end up so siloed. And to go back to what we were talking about, being in a car, being in a room, moving from one air conditioned place to another, the next time you're driving around, roll the windows down, smell the air, like be in the place that you're in, and just allow your body to kind of enjoy it. It might be uncomfortable in some ways. Nature is not always comfortable. There's no guarantee of that, but she is always honest and she's
Oh.
going to tell you the truth, you know? So yeah, she is trustworthy to me, she is trustworthy. She's not going to lie to me. And that's amazing.
Wow. I want to thank you for being on the show. I hate to wind it up, but because you're great. And I love talking with you. And I feel like a couple things. I do think that there's a book in your future. And I also would love to pull you into a retreat down the line, because I think that would be great.
Let's do it. That'd be
I know. I
amazing.
love it, because we're in alignment. We are in alignment. So
yeah.
I want to remind the listeners to choose that notification bell on this page on YouTube, because you'll get updates when interesting and wonderful interviews like this pop up, and you can listen to them while you work. I encourage people to sometimes to do the doodling or painting while they're listening. It's a great way to keep your mind engaged and with an activity. Claire, thanks so much for being on the show. This has been great. And
thank you.
I know we'll be talking to again in the future.
Yay. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. And I really appreciate the ability to wander in conversation. So thank you for that from, myself and from the trees here in the Pacific Northwest.
Thanks very much. We hope to see you soon.
Thank you.